Okay, so hello everyone, and this is a class on retail environments. I've decided to do this class as a video tutorial again, just because I've had some positive feedback from you guys saying that you like the style of that and find it useful to be able to refer back to the content in your own time. So this is a sort of small lecture about retail environments, particularly comparing the differences between physical stores, so bricks and mortar stores, and online environments. The idea of this is for you to be thinking about your own brand, your retailer that you're writing your shop report on for part B of the Fashion Insider Methods and Tools brief, and to be thinking about how your brand position themselves and how they use the different platforms, the physical stores that they have, as well as the online presence that they have for their consumers. So this is just obviously a general question to get you thinking. What you already know about the retail environment, with particular focus, as I said, on your own brand that you've chosen for your shop report. So if you don't already know, hopefully you do, but if you don't already know, then do some research into how many retail outlets they've got, for example, how many physical stores they've got, if they're an international brand, if they're just a UK-based brand, where their key locations are, particularly where their flagship store is, and again, how they use their online platforms. So if they've got a website, is the website transactional, i.e., can you purchase product from the website, or is it really just used more of a sort of marketing tool or framework for the consumer to just browse through and then purchase the product in the store? So ask yourself how your brand is currently performing in the retail environment and what platforms they're making the most of. This quote is from Mintel. So this was a few months ago in the springtime of this year. It says, while there is a trend towards cutting down on social media use, so we hear the term digital detox quite a lot, more people than ever are using social networks and the vast majority are sharing content. So it's a sort of almost a contradictory quote, in my opinion. It's sort of saying that people are cutting down, so they're trying to detox from their social media use, but actually they're using more social networks than they had previously done, but perhaps just more sporadically, and they're sort of spreading themselves more thinly across different social networks, and sharing content that they collate or sharing content that they find interesting with potentially their followers or their friends on these platforms, which is obviously something that brands need to be aware of. These are just some infographics that I found that I thought were quite useful for you to be having a little look at. They're all current ones of this year. So this particular one says 3/4 of people have recently used Facebook. So the percentages on the in the coloured sort of banners are referring to the percentages of people that have used Facebook or YouTube or different social platforms in the last 3 months. So that's quite an interesting infographic for you to look back on. And this one, these perception charts, I think are always quite interesting. A couple of you have been asking about perception charts, which is something that we will look at in the future of the course as well. We don't necessarily look at it in year 1, but it does come into play in year 2 and year 3. So this is one from Mintel, and it's looking at the correspondence of social networks, so how people basically perceive the different social networks that are plotted on here. So you can see they've got Snapchat, they've got Instagram, YouTube, Twitter and Facebook, and the position of them in relation to the words with the black dots is how people perceive them. So you can see that down in the bottom corner you've got Facebook, and that's near the perception of untrustworthy, invasive and stressful, whereas you've got Snapchat in the quadrant above, which is quite near the perception of being confusing. Instagram, cool, cutting edge, fun, and YouTube sort of down, not necessarily too close to that many actually, but nearer the sort of informative end of the spectrum. And Twitter, of course, near the perception of being quite addictive. So it's quite interesting for you to be thinking about if your brand or your retailer that you're looking at for your shop report are using these social platforms, how people actually perceive them, what we actually as consumers feel about these platforms, regardless of the brand itself, but the actual platform, how we use them, why we use them, and how we feel about how we're interacting with these platforms is quite an interesting place to start. Obviously, a really key question and simple question that you could ask yourself is where you currently shop. So obviously we're all consumers as well. We have our favourite brands or our least favourite brands that we go to when we want to purchase something. How do you shop? You know, are you one of these people that shops in store? Do you always purchase things in store? Do you like the experience of going shopping, looking around the stores, trying on product perhaps? Or are you more of an online shopper? So do you prefer to sit at home in the comfort of your own home and have product delivered to you, and then maybe send it back if it's not the right size, and kind of engage with your purchase process that way? So think about why you have certain shopping preferences. Have you always been like that, or is that something that's changed either recently or over the last 3 to 5 years, for example? What may have changed that or influenced that? Perhaps you became busier, or you just sort of went off the experience of shopping, and if so, why is that the case? And you know, what appeals to you as a consumer? Is it the experience, as I say, the physical experience of being in a retail store, or is it the convenience of being at home and shopping at home in the comfort of your own environment? This is another interesting quote. So there's loads and loads of stuff on Mintel from this year about retail environments and shopping preferences. But this is a really interesting quote that says, children are particularly responsive to products that they see online. So brands must keep a strong social media presence and work with social influencers to promote their product. However, brands must also ensure that they are responsibly targeting these consumers to ensure that the gatekeepers to a child's money, the parents, are satisfied with where their money is spent. So if you're looking at children's wear, I know a couple of you are looking at children's wear, there's obviously a really interesting buyer relationship when you look at children's wear, because you've got not only the child, and this particular quote saying that children are becoming a lot more aware of what they like and what they don't like, and that's perhaps being influenced by what they're seeing online. So we're all aware that there's a rise of young children, or children in general, using social platforms or watching YouTube videos, and looking at iPads for quite a long period of time. So how does that influence how they then want to shop, or what they then want to buy or be seen wearing or be seen playing with? You can link that to a recent example of Fortnite that came out, the game that came out, which was potentially not supposed to be attracting a young child due to the sort of violent content and the violent nature of the game, but actually has attracted quite a young person to use that, as well as the kind of stereotypical consumer that they were intending to launch at. So how does that influence how children not only behave, but how they actually respond to what they wear and how their parents shop for them? But also, if you're looking at children's wear, how the parent feels. So the parent is obviously ultimately the person that's paying, even if it's the child spending pocket money, that's obviously come from the parent. So how can you make sure that if you're a children's wear brand, that you're appealing to the child, which has got the kind of push factor, but you're also appealing to the parent, and you're satisfying the parent and pleasing the parent at the same time with how and where their money is spent? So going on from children's wear, this is a really interesting graph. This was actually from last year, so this is not from this year, but I think it probably is still pretty relevant. So you've got the percentages along the top, and it's got 75% of children chose that they shop online, where they bought their things was online, and that was on Amazon. So probably not really a great surprise there, but quite interesting to look at the other brands and the other stores down the left-hand side. A lot of gaming and a lot of apps, music, PlayStation, kind of platforms like that. And only, you've only got ASOS and Next on there that are actually closed clothing stores. So, the vast majority of money that children have, or that children wish to spend, is on gaming and playing and that kind of area of the industry. So that's quite an interesting comparison. So shopping online. So this is a quote. This not a quote. Sorry, this is a graph comparing male and female buying preferences. So have you bought any fashion items online in the last 12 months? Was the question they were asked. And you've got the age categories. So you've got 16 to 24 up to 65 plus. And it's quite interesting to see how that differs between male and female. More significantly, perhaps, for the male, so you've got the younger males up to sort of 16 to 44 shopping online, and then that declines quite significantly in comparison to how women's wear, and in comparison to how females shop. It doesn't decline quite as significantly, but males, you know, if you look at those two middle columns, the 25 to 44 and the 45 to 64, for the male column goes from 75% to 48% over that age period. So that's quite interesting, you know, suggesting that as males get older, they don't prefer shopping online. They prefer going into a retail environment at a certain age. You know, you may agree or disagree with this graph, but it's quite interesting to see the kind of different perceptions and the different preferences of male versus female consumers here. Again, another quote. This one has come from WGSN, I believe. No, sorry, Mintel. It's come from Mintel. And this is one that you can read through in your own time, but it's basically saying how consumers' buying preferences have changed over time, and how their expectations and their sort of what they expect from brands has changed. So their whole perception of the shopping experience is becoming something that brands need to become much more aware of over time, and it's something that they sort of strategists believe is only going to become more and more significant over the coming years. So in terms of age again, so in terms of the sort of age group of consumers, here you've got 81% of millennials have bought online in the last 12 months. So obviously a significant number of people in that age group. You've got 85% of young women preferring to buy their clothes online, which is 10% more than young males, suggesting that young women prefer shopping online than young men in that age group. And then 54% of over 45s have shopped online, although many still prefer to shop in store, as we just sort of touched upon with the previous graph. So if we think about the British High Street for a while, so if we come away from the kind of online environment and start to think more about physical retail stores and bricks and mortar retail environments, obviously there's been a few brands over the last few years that have disappeared from the British High Street. So obviously some names will jump out straight away. I'm sure that British Home Stores is one that probably springs to mind quite quickly. But if you aren't kind of aware of this, then do spend some time having a little look. There's loads of information on the internet about brands that have disappeared from the British High Street. But think about not only what brands have disappeared, but why you think they've disappeared, what the kind of factors that led up to their disappearance were, what the market was like at the time, how consumers' shopping preferences had changed over that period of time, in turn potentially leading to them not shopping in their stores anymore. And what impact do you think it will have? So the ones that have gone, obviously, unfortunately, have gone, and they mark the end of a certain era of the British High Street. But how do you think it will impact moving forward? So what do you think may happen in the next 10 years, for example, on the British High Street? You know, these are all things that you should be thinking about as students that are interested in going into the fashion industry. What are the key influences or the key impacts that we need to be aware of, not only of how consumers feel and how they engage with brands, but how that impacts on the industry overall. And I think the British High Street's a really interesting place to start looking at that in terms of some research. So we're not talking just about retail and purchasing product. You'll see there's been a lot of banks and travel agents and estate agents that are at risk of losing their place on the British High Street as the internet takes over. So I recently, just as an example, I recently had a leaflet actually that came through, like a postcard that came through the post to my home. and it was from a online estate agent, and it was marketing all sorts of brilliant advantages of selling your property with them. You see adverts of similar sorts on the TV, sort of cutting out the middleman, if you like. Similarly to travel agents, I'm sure that not many of us, myself included, if we're looking to book a holiday, if we're lucky enough to be going on holiday, do we actually go and visit a travel agent on the high street? They are still around. There are still a few of them around, but they're fewer and far between. And it's much less common as a first port of call to go and physically speak to somebody about booking a holiday. Generally because, of course, you can do that from the comfort of your own home online. There's all sorts of comparison websites to make sure you're getting the best deal. Whereas, the environment of going into a travel agent in a physical environment is perhaps considered a little bit stagnant and not quite as exciting or not quite as reliable for us as people that are looking to book holidays. So it's not just fashion and it's not just retail. There's all sorts of other examples. These are just a few. All sorts of other examples of how people's perceptions and people's attitudes towards purchasing goods or purchasing experiences has changed. So if we think about the future of the British High Street, obviously this is a sort of golden question, if you like. What the future of the British High Street isn't something that we can necessarily absolutely guarantee at this stage. This is a quote from the summer of this year by Which, suggesting that town centre spending is set to increase by 4.9%, which equates to 5.3 billion UK pounds in the next 5 years, according to retail research company Global Data, with food and grocery spending also set to rise, but quite significantly. So this is actually an interesting suggestion, saying that actually it's not all doom and gloom and it's not all goodbye British High Street and hello online shopping. It's actually suggesting that over the next 5 years, town centre and physical bricks and mortar shopping will actually see an increase again. So it's suggesting that perhaps we're in a bit of a dip at the moment, in a bit of a lull, but actually there's a resurgence that's expected by this particular data company, expected over the next 5 years. So the key to the future forecast. So these are a couple of things that I've researched, that I've pulled out from various resources to kind of think about how the British High Street may change. So this one, socialising on the High Street. There are over 22,000 coffee shops on the UK high streets alone, which is pretty shocking. Well, actually pretty impressive if you think about it. 22,000 coffee shops is a vast number, and that's just on UK high streets. That's not including anywhere else. That's just physical high street coffee shops. 22,000 in the UK. And you'll see these collaborations, well, not collaborations, but these partnerships popping up. And they're quite interesting. I find them quite interesting personally. But you'll see things like Harrison Hall, so the coffee chain Harrison Hall, popping up in Tesco stores. So Tesco, obviously grocery shopping stores, or Tesco extra stores, whatever the large stores are called. You'll see Harrison Hall popping up in those stores now. You see Starbucks in Sainsbury's. You see Sainsbury's in Argos. And you see Costa coffee shops in Homebase. So you'll see these kind of coffee-related brands and businesses popping up in different retail environments to how you would expect them to be. So another example, if you think about a few years ago, if you think about the bookstore Waterstones, they introduced coffee shops into their bookstores. So the idea being you can pop in and purchase a book, but you could also pop in for a coffee and a cake. Similarly with these, I'm not convinced necessarily how many people would nip into Homebase for a Costa coffee, but the idea being that if you're in Homebase anyway, you could also purchase a coffee or a piece of cake or a sandwich whilst you're there from Costa. Another one, concept shops. So if you think about Made.com, I'm sure you're all familiar with Made.com. It's got showrooms in London and Birmingham. You can look and try items before you actually purchase them online. So interestingly, with Made.com, you can't actually purchase the product in the store. So the store is like a showroom, not a transactional place to purchase the product. So you go into the showroom, they've only got a couple, you go into the showroom, you try out the product, you sit on the furniture, or you kind of look at how it functions, you decide what you like. And it's almost like a reinvention of the catalogue, if you like, but in a physical environment. So you go and actually physically try it out, you decide which one you want, and then you go and purchase it online. You can purchase it online in the store, or you purchase it online at home once you get back. Automated shopping is one that I'm sure we're all familiar with. So contactless payments is just the beginning. Being able to pay for your shopping in store through an app on your phone is something that certain brands are trialling at the moment. So, this idea that I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that I very, very rarely have any cash on me. It's quite remarkable if I actually have got cash on me, but I rely on my contactless card. Everything I pay for would be on a contactless card if I'm out and about. I don't, even think about carrying money around. Whereas, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, I wouldn't be seen without cash on me because that was the only way I would be paying. So automated shopping is quite interesting, again, incorporating apps into how people can purchase, but in a physical environment. So this is not talking about online, this is talking about places you can go physically, so bricks and mortar environments, but you can pay digitally, or you can experience them in a slightly different way to how we would traditionally perceive the British High Street. This is a recent example from Zalando. So again, a brand I'm sure you're all familiar with, but Zalando launched its first beauty range in Germany in March of this year, and has followed this with the opening of a physical store in a fashionable district in Berlin in the summer. So the vast majority of people shop for beauty and personal care products in store, with only 2% of people buying online. So I'm sure that we can think about why that may be. But actually wanting to see what the product feels like on our skin, or how it smells, or what the texture of it's like, is quite difficult to do if you're looking at just a picture of the packaging online. So the beauty station from Zalando offers a tangible product experience for the consumer, allowing them to try products before they buy, something that obviously isn't possible with an online only offering. So they came up with this really kind of quite beautiful beauty station actually. This is just one photo from it. But this was an idea of bringing a brand that isn't necessarily associated with being in a physical environment into a physical environment, still attracting the same consumer potentially, possibly attracting a new consumer or an additional consumer as well, but not changing who they're attracting or what they're offering as a product, but just changing how it's accessible and how the consumer can engage with it. So it's just basically another string to its bow, if you like. So another quote from Mintel: interestingly, the internet will play a critical role in ensuring that our British high street survives. The high street needs to adapt, not to disappear. And I think that quote, for me personally, really sums up the previous statement from the data analysts that said that the British high street will actually see a rise in popularity over the next 5 years. I think what the essence of this is saying is that actually, yes, it will do that, but it won't do that without the help and without the support of the internet. So it's about fusing those two environments together rather than having them being seen as they were previously or traditionally seen as two separate experiences or two separate ways to purchase. Is actually about how you can fuse them together, so how they can support each other and work with each other to offer something that's new and current and relevant to how we as consumers have changed in terms of how we want to shop. So it's the internet's not being wiped out, the online environments aren't being wiped out, they're just being utilised in a different way. And the British High Street isn't being wiped out, but it's using support from the internet or from these online automated platforms to give a sort of resurgence and a reboost of energy into the British High Street. So to summarise, you need to be thinking about how this affects your retailer. So the brand you've chosen for part B of your shop report, as I said at the beginning, does your retailer sell mainly online or in store? Can you find any information about what plans they have for the future? So are they looking at tapping into any of these things that we've briefly mentioned in this lecture? Do they have any plans to kind of change their approach to how they offer product to the consumer? If so, what are they? What are those plans, or are they top secret? And where do you think your brand's consumer actually wants to shop? So again, you know, if you think about the things that we've spoken about consumers in their current state, if you think about the psychographic profile, we're plotting where our consumer currently is, but we're thinking actually they may want to move, the brand may have a perception that's different in the future for how they want their consumer to engage with their product. So if so, how does their retail experience impact or influence this? What are their kind of plans to change or attract new and different consumer bases to their brand? And make some notes. So don't, you know, there's not necessarily a section of bricks and mortar versus online in your shop report, but it's certainly something that you can be referring to and mentioning within the development of that piece of work. And it's something that hopefully you guys will have been thinking about anyway, naturally, as you're building your shop report for your brand.